Hey everybody, welcome back to Babygirl Book Club.
Woo!
Thanks so much for tuning in for our newest episode. This is 2024, a year in books. We're going to talk about all the books we read this year, what we liked, what we didn't like, and most importantly, our favorite book boyfriends of the year. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
Jess, how many books did you read this year?
All right. So in prepping for this, I learned that maybe letting Kindle track all this on my behalf was not a good idea. So most of what I read is through the Kindle app, but definitely not all. And the app said I read 31 books. That said, I'm not sure if it's just like a memory lapse on my part. Half the books on the list I have no recollection of actually reading. And there were a bunch of books I remember reading that were not on the list. And I did learn you have to scroll all the way to the end, whereas I might have only scrolled to the last page. So that's kind of where that is. And then I know I read a few actual printed books. So I'm going to say I landed around 35, but it could be more or less.
I feel like it's got to be more because I read 39 books. And it seems crazy that I would have read more than you. Although I do with mine,
audiobook.
Right. I would say probably 90%, if not more, were all audiobooks. And I was running into the same problem as well because I've never actually looked at the data of all the books I've read in a year before. Before I looked at my reading history, I really couldn't have told you, for the most part, what books I read because it obviously was so many. And I read the Wheel of Time series that I thought that was this year, but it was definitely last year. Actually, yeah, it was early last year. But anyway, I was so convinced that happened this year. It did not at all. So I read 39 books and I tried to get a good timeline of when I read them, but Audible kind of does the same thing where if you don't fully listen to the entire epilogue and the credits and the everything, it counts it weirdly. When I was going through it, it was telling me you read this book in October, and I was like, I know I read that in July and I must have accidentally clicked on the wrong book to read. So technology needs to figure it out. This year I want to be a little more mindful about tracking what I'm reading just for fun, to keep track of things for the podcast. So it'll be interesting for 2025 to see what comes out as far as how many books we do and what the genre is and stuff like that. So who were the authors that you read the most books from?
T.L. Swan, I read the absolute most, 6, but I don't think I finished the last one, so maybe 5.5. Megan Quinn was next, 5.5, because I didn't finish the last one I was reading. Elle Kennedy was next with 4.5, same thing, didn't finish the last one. And then Carrie and Cole, it noted 3 books, but one of them wasn't on the list, and I might have read a few more, so I'm going to say I read at least 4 of her books.
Nice.
How about you?
I guess I read mostly Diana Gabaldon. Is that how you say it?
Sure.
Gabaldon? Diana Gabaldon? I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, Outlander, which is funny because I didn't read I had started reading the series as a reread in 2023. So I didn't even read the whole series this year, but just because it's so long, it's 10 books. And then I read, I think 2 of the novellas as well.
And those books are long.
They are very long and I love them so much. So that was my top author of the year with 6 books. And then Brent Weeks, who is the author of the Lightbringer series. I read that series this year, which is 5 books long. And then I also read the Court of Thorn and Roses this year from Sarah J. Maas, which is 5 books as well. So those are my top 3. Yeah, I'm working on getting through more J.D. Evans. I'm trying to finish Mages of the Wheel. So I think that's 5 or 6 books as well. So I'm not going to finish them all this year, I don't think. I mean, it's only December 22nd. So
we've got time.
Yeah, we've got time. So T.L. Swan, I'm not super familiar with her
Yeah.
books.
So almost all the ones that T.L. Swan, Elle Kennedy, and Megan Quinn, they're all kind of in the romantic comedy genre. It seems like that's really what my vibe was this year when I looked back over it. Megan Quinn especially, I mean, any of her books could very easily be translated into a romantic comedy movie. T.L. Swan, a little less so into the movie realm, but same sort of idea. Some of them, can be a little repetitive, but, I think I read 2 different series by her. And it's all friends, right? And then each book is its own couple in the friend group. And then Elle Kennedy, same thing, but a high focus on sports romance, in particular hockey romance, which is a genre I highly recommend. I am not into sports in any way, shape, or form, and I never have been, except for sports romance. It is like its own beautiful thing.
That's so funny.
But again, all romantic comedies, and I don't know if it was just Manacled was so heavy, so I needed something light to get me through, or just where I was at in my life. I find that if I'm struggling in any way, shape, or form, I want Hallmark, lighthearted, beautiful romance.
Did you read a lot of those like after we had finished Manacled then? Or
Elle Kennedy, yeah, I didn't read any Elle Kennedy until after. That's all like in the last month. I mean, I went really hard on the Elle Kennedy.
Yeah. I read a lot of books last month. November was my top month of reading. I read 8 books.
Damn.
I mean, they were shorter. And I started out November, I was traveling quite a bit. So I was just sitting on an airplane or in the back of a car, just reading a lot. So I just had the time to do it. Okay, so we've got our top authors of the year. I would say 6 very different authors, which is pretty funny. What about out of the approximately 35 books that you read, what were your top rated books themselves, like regardless of the author?
So Manacled was probably my number one. It was definitely the one I was most emotionally invested in. The one I could not put down and made time for, even though I had 1,000 other things to do. But Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. So I know lots of people have read that book, seen the movie. I had never done either. And my mother-in-law actually gave it to me, and she was like, read this and just give it to someone else who will read it after. And so that was what I read at camp this year, and just a beautiful book, just beautiful writing. It's not really smutty at all, but that's okay.
Yeah, sometimes it's okay to take a break.
Yeah, but I enjoyed that book very much. It's a page turner. Couldn't put it down.
You know what's funny is I remember you telling me about that book, and I was like, oh yeah, I've read it, and I said some stuff about it, and you're like, I don't remember that happening. And just now in this moment, I realized that for a long time, I've been confusing that book with Their Eyes Are Watching God, which
wow, it's very different books.
Yes.
Very different.
I don't know why.
Maybe because I think they both happen in the South.
Yeah, they're both from the South, and they were kind of maybe getting popular around the same time. I don't know. But
yeah.
I, for some reason, have been confusing those 2 books for each other.
That book.
That is so funny.
It's a good book.
Now, I don't know that I've actually read it.
I read it in college, and I actually, within the last year, opened it and started reading it. I didn't finish it because it wasn't where I was at in my reading journey at that point in time. But that's interesting. I have it. You can borrow it.
For sure, yeah. Okay, so for me, my favorite books of the year, and I'm trying to think I think it's hard to place them as like gold medal, silver medal, bronze medal.
Especially if they're different.
Yes. And I have been mostly in the romantasy, like romantic fantasy genre. Most of the romance books I read this year were like fantasy based as opposed to a contemporary romance. But even within that genre, books can vary wildly. Right, between the different worlds and the different lore and the different creatures and whatever. But I would say my favorite books of the year were Rain and Ruin by J.D. Evans, which is so funny because Jess cannot.
I've tried like 3 different times at least to read that book. Right. I'm going to try again. I want to read it. I could see how I should love it. But for whatever reason, I start zoning out and I got no time for that.
Yeah, it's really good once you kind of get a feel for the world. I have seen some people complaining that like the world building is a little clunky at times. Like it just dumps this information on you that you're like, what am I supposed to do with this? And it becomes relevant eventually, right? But I really enjoyed that. I love the love story in that book. We're going to do a separate episode on that book, so I'm going to save some of my thoughts for that episode. And also the sequel to that, Storm and Shield, I really, really liked as well. It was another one that I like couldn't put down. It's hard for me to decide which one I like better, but I like them both a lot. I think I like the love story in Reign and Ruin more, but the character backgrounds and trials and tribulation in Storm and Shield, I kind of like that a little bit more, you know? It was interesting. But then Paladin's Grace from the Saint of Steel series by T. Kingfisher. That book was so good. I read it in one day. Ooh. I started it in the morning and then I stayed up late and just read it all day. Damn. It was amazing. I was on a road trip. So I started it like when we left and then read it all the way in the car. We got home and I read some more and then I stayed up super late to finish it. And it was so good. It has a like mystery element to it. It's kind of a murder mystery sort of thing, which I haven't read something like that in a long time. So it just was the right combination of I have time to physically read this and it's a little bit different than what I've been reading, and it's a really nice love story and another really cool like world building kind of thing. So I really loved that. And then both of us I think had Peaches and Honey, These Immortal Truths as our number 3 of the year.
I just finished that book Friday. So good. Not smutty at all.
No,
just
not
true
really.
Classic romance, slow burn. At times I was questioning if it was even a romance or just a good book, but very good. I just started the sequel. I'm very excited about that. Definitely recommend.
That's awesome. Yeah, I read that one a month or two ago and I really, really loved it. That one I did all audiobook, so I remember maybe 40% of what happens in the book at this point. I really do want to go back and reread it like actually reading style just to get a little more absorbed into the story. But the voice actor for the audiobook I thought she was amazing. I love historical elements in books, which is why I love the Outlander series, because it's like fantastical, but it's also historical. This series also has fantastical and historical elements, so it was just really cool. I've seen some people knock it because it's not super smut heavy or because some people were saying they thought it was repetitive.
I didn't think that at all.
Yeah. I mean, if you break it down into, okay, Anna goes to a place, she is a nurse and she helps people and then she has to leave, and then she goes to another place and then she helps people. I mean, it's like, I guess, but
that's life, right?
It was much more nuanced than that. Yeah. So I think it's one of those books that might not be for everybody, but if you like beautiful writing, beautiful stories, and like deeply emotional ties with friends and family and lovers, and you know, I really,
it speaks to the soul.
Right. It was such a good book.
I will say I do feel like some parts of the book were very vague, especially surrounding the historical pieces, so I wouldn't have minded those being a little less vague, but I also get, as a writer, I get it, right? Like, especially, doesn't seem like this writer's goal was to do a deep dive on history, right?
Yeah, and I can...
History was the context for the setting.
Yeah, I could appreciate that. Like, if you're not a scholar on, like, world history from, I think it started out in, like...
1142
like the 12th century.
Or something.
Yeah, so I get it. So I think it was... The historical elements were done in a tasteful way. It kept it interesting. But, I would have definitely read another 500 pages about all of that. But I'm an insufferable nerd. So.
Well, and I think on some level, like, it is historical, but that's not the purpose of it, right? It's this character's experience with being immortal and living for so long, and how important are the fine-tuned details of history when you live for 1,000 years, right?
Yeah, super cool. We'll have to plan to do an episode on that one. I have a couple episodes in the pipeline, but maybe we can plan that one for like February. I think would be cool. Now comes the time where we discuss the most important awards to give out for the year, which is our favorite book boyfriends of 2024. And seeing as we both read around 35 or more books, that's a lot of boyfriends.
It is
we
lot
did a
of
lot
boyfriends.
of dating this year, Jess.
I had to explain this to Ben this morning.
Oh my God.
He seemed very concerned when I said, he was like, what's a book boyfriend?
Now, do you connect, when you connect with like a male character, do you kind of feel that way? Like, do you put yourself in that situation, or is it just like whatever book you're reading is your book boyfriend of the day?
I think it's a little bit of both.
Yeah, for
right?
sure.
Like Draco Malfoy made my list from both Manacled and Draco Malfoy and the mortifying ordeal of being in love. Right, because even though he's different, he's still the same guy in both books. You know, I don't know if I was in either of those worlds, if I'd necessarily be all in, right? I assume I'd be.
Like the reality
of
Draco Malfoy,
of that.
right?
But reading it, absolutely. I do think on some level they're all my book boyfriends, but then they're the ones that it's like, what is this bitch doing with him? Like, come on.
Yeah, the red flag. I kind of connect with that as well. Like, as I was making this list, and I think you read my notes, I don't know if you saw it, that I was like, oh, I think I have a type.
I did see that.
I was like, and then I kind of thought of like my real life partner, and I was like, yep, that's my type, which is a dangerous cinnamon roll kind of person. But I also do love, like, I'm not that girl that loves the enemies to lovers.
Ugh,
but
my favorite.
Sometimes I do like it. I like it when it's done right. Because what I don't like and what I feel like I see so much of is people who annoy each other who are then lovers. And that's not an enemy. If you're an enemy,
you're an enemy.
You need to do fucked up shit. You need to be like trying to kill all my friends.
You should read some Ashley Jade.
Oh yeah?
Yeah. Oh man, we should do some Ashley Jade books. She's intense.
I'd love to. Yeah.
She's intense.
Yeah, because that's for me, like, if you're gonna go all the way, go all the way.
Yeah, she goes all the way.
And I do like, you know, stories that feel more real, because in reality, you probably would not ever entertain a sexual tryst with someone who tried to or successfully killed someone in your family.
Right.
But this is fantasy. So I think if we're going to try to get away with stuff like that, let's do it. I'm all in. So
this brings up an interesting the fantasy piece, which at some point we should do a whole episode on Rena Kent.
Yes, I'd love to.
You know, Rena Kent, she writes very dark stuff, lots of kink, specific kinks, right? And she's called it the Renaverse, and she actually made one of my superlatives, but we'll get to that later.
Right.
But she's ending the quote-unquote Renaverse. It's just interesting because that's been her whole thing, is the enemies to lovers, super dark, really fucked up men, villains, right, in this crazy fantasy, and that's been her whole shtick, and now she's ending it. And from everything I've gathered and read, it seems like she's just been shamed so many times. And this writer, there's no pictures of her. I don't even think Rena Kent's her real name, and I always assumed it's because of the content she produces, but nonetheless, she's been shamed into the corner.
Do you think she's actually a woman?
I do.
You do?
I do.
Sometimes people are like, oh,
but maybe not.
I think this whatever book was written by a man because of the way they write X, Y, Z.
No, definitely written by a woman. I think.
Yeah.
But
I've read some of her stuff, but not a ton.
Yeah.
I can't remember. What was like the Royal something?
Royal Elite.
Yes.
That series. Yeah, that's her first. Well, I don't think it's her first. Some of her books you can't even find because she took them out of publish.
That's so cool. I mean, I know she's kind of a divisive author.
Just interesting.
Yes.
Like, even with being anonymous, again, she's still been shamed into the corner, and I don't know, apparently her next book's going to be a romantic comedy, and it's like, how? This is going to be terrible. What are you doing?
That's
like,
so interesting.
Nobody else is writing really books like that, and if they are, they're too far for me, right, into the dark realm. So I don't know. I'm disappointed. She has written a lot of books, though, and they were becoming a little formulaic. But again, hopefully we'll do a whole episode on her and talk about that.
I think
Deep
we
dive
definitely should. That'd be super fun. Okay, so I had to like go through and actually look at the books I read this year because I didn't didn't realize that I was in the middle of an Outlander reread at the beginning of the year, which means I get to give my top book boyfriend of 2024 to Jamie Fraser, which is so well deserved. I've read the Outlander series, I think 3 times so far. I've reread it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I just love it. I love books that are long and detailed, and as much as I love high fantasy and stuff like that, I also really love books that have that kind of slice of life realism in them, where you read about making blood sausage and cooking dried apple tarts, and I don't know. I've always loved stuff like that. I love Jamie and Claire's love story. There's a lot of interesting stuff with the time travel. There's all the historical elements in those books. But Jamie Fraser himself is a king amongst men.
Oh, for serious.
He's just a classic, like, swoon-worthy type of guy. He wears kilts. He can knit socks. He can build a house. He can speak Latin and Greek, and just, I mean,
his undying love and devotion to Claire, for me, is what. And full disclosure, I read half of the first book. I've just watched the show, but he still wins for me, too.
I wondered about that.
And this, and I mean, my partner's great, and has some Jamie-like qualities for sure. But this also, to get to your earlier question about book boyfriends, too, I don't necessarily, I mean, I have a type. I'm dating him. He's my real-life type. But in book boyfriends, I like my variety, right?
Yes.
And men like Jamie, who are just going to drop everything. They win. They take the ticket.
He is just the best. And I don't know if I could give up modern toilet paper to be with him, but we could figure something out.
Yeah. He could travel to this time.
That's true. Although people have kind of theorized on how that would go, and overall people think poorly. But
he'd probably get arrested.
If he came to Maine,
he might do all right.
He'd be fine. We would take him up to,
just go out to camp.
Go up north, and it'd be pretty much exactly. So, do you want to talk about your top book boyfriend of the year, or at least one of them?
Well, we talked about Draco.
Right. Yes.
So again, I did bad job tracking, and I have a terrible memory apparently. So Tate Walker from Where the Crawdads Sing was my other top. He does make a terrible misstep and abandons Kaya for a while, which is bad. But his love for her is true and honest, and he never stops loving her, and he comes back to her, and she's with someone else, and he respects her enough to kind of give that space but still be there. That's some devotion. And I guess that's what it is for me, is the devotion.
Yes. It's sexy.
It's very sexy.
Another one of my favorite book boyfriends of the year is Makram from Reign and Ruin. He is such an interestingly flawed character. As a person, he's very loyal, he's understanding, he's physically really strong, and he's very funny. So I love all of those qualities, but he has some things in his past where he's kind of allowed himself to like be abused by his like family members, and that makes he makes some bad decisions because of that. So that's where we see his flaws and like get some better understanding of his character, and it makes him really relatable in a way. And so he's just a sweet guy who can also like give someone a heart attack from across the room or crumble something to dust. And so he's very cool, like magic, very understanding guy. And we'll get more into my undying love for him when we do the Reign and Ruin episode, but I just really loved his character. I think he's really hot, probably. I hope, if he's out there.
That's so funny. So in this conversation, I did remember I do have another top book and top book boyfriend for the year. It was one of the TL Swan books, The Takeover. It's book 2 in her Miles High Club series. And Tristan Miles is the man, and he's with a woman named Claire, if I'm remembering correctly. And the Miles family, they're all very loaded, very wealthy. All the brothers run a business together, and then each book in the series follows a different brother. And his was my favorite. So Claire, she's a single mom. She's got 3 boys, and her husband passed away, and she's kind of running his company for her boys to eventually take over, but it's falling apart. And Tristan Miles, that's what he does in his family business, is he takes over failing businesses, buys them, turns them around. And so that's how they meet, and it's kind of an enemies to lovers things, but he's obsessed with her. And it's just such a funny book. Like the kids aspect too, I don't typically care for that,
right?
But she does it so well, and it's so funny, and it's just so good. And he is just, even though she's still grieving, it's been years, but how do you not grieve? It's just so well done, and he sticks through it, and it's just so good. He's so good.
So I would say my final book boyfriend of the year is Stephen from Paladin's Grace, because he's another strong man who's also very sad and very guilty inside, and he also knits socks. But this is when I realized that this is kind of my type, is this strong man who is secretly sad. Which is so funny. Stephen is another really complex character. I hope that we at least read the first book of this series for the show, because the world building is super cool. He's a paladin of a god who died. And when the god died, a bunch of the paladins went crazy and killed themselves or killed so many people that they had to be murdered and put down. So there's only 7 of them that are still alive, and they were taken in by this temple that basically does service to poor people and stuff like that. He's a berserker, so if he thinks there's danger, there is this battle tide that comes over him. He goes into a berserker rage, but you can kind of control it, but there are a couple times in the book where he does it, and it's very cute. Which doesn't make sense. I don't want to tell you too much in case we do read it, but he's just a cute berserker paladin, and I don't know, I can get down with that, I guess. Also, his character is older. Okay. He's at least 30, if not more, mid 30s to almost 40s, which I like.
Age gap, or just that age?
No, just people being older, because I can only read so many books about a 19-year-old woman that's a fairy before I'm I don't relate to this. So I overall characters that are older and who actually feel older, who have some life experience and some wisdom. I guess I relate to that. I wouldn't call myself incredibly wise, but I'm trying at least.
So that actually makes me think of another book I read this year that I thought about putting on my top books list. I don't know if I did. Called The Lovely Return. And it is an age-gapped romance. It's by Carrie Cole, I think. Age gap, I'm sometimes about. Not always. Yeah. This one definitely tiptoes the line of being problematic for me because of the age gap, and because it starts when she's younger, we'll say. The romance itself doesn't, the sexy parts don't until she's of age, but it's still questionable, but it's more about reincarnation. Right. So it kept my interest for that reason, because even though the age gap felt inappropriate and very problematic, that was the part that made it less so.
Okay.
But very good, very heart-crushing because of that. And I'm learning through this that maybe torturous, heart-crushing romances are really my thing.
I guess. Sometimes you definitely need that. I mean,
not all the time.
Not all the time, certainly. Because I do like books that are funny too, but just I love getting lost in the lore, in the longing, in the just the world. So I can see where books that really torture you are just you can't put it down, sometimes. So I want to talk a little bit about some books that I did not like. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't have a ton because if I didn't like them, I stopped reading them.
Yeah,
I didn't make
I don't
my
know.
list. So
I don't know why I didn't do that. There is one book that I didn't. I tried to start it like twice and I couldn't do it. That was Villains and I think Villain and Virtues, which I believe is also called A Throne in the Dark, which is a really highly recommended series, but I just couldn't get it going. And that was also an audiobook, so it might have just been that I wasn't mentally in a place where I could pay attention to the beginning, because sometimes the beginning just doesn't work, and then if I can't straighten out and get into it, I'm lost. So I couldn't get into that one. I definitely want to give it another try because people say it's great. Overall, if I start a book, I'm finishing it. Like, maybe I need to stop doing that because I've read a lot of fucking stinkers this year, and I think like most of my stinkers of the year were in the creature romance, which I find interesting.
It's very interesting.
I like werewolves, I like vampires, I like all that stuff. I'm down to entertain the idea of something different, shall we say. And we both read Bride this year.
We did.
Which is a werewolf and vampire escapade. I did like it overall. And that was the first book I read that had nodding in it, which led me down like a weird rabbit hole, as I'm sure some people may or may not admit to doing also. So because I liked that book, I started reading a couple other creature romances, and things got weird, and the writing got bad.
Ooh.
So bad. So I'm trying to decide which one of these books I didn't like more. So there was Halfling, which is an orc romance book. I think I told you about this one when I was reading it. So I read it because they were like, it's a cozy love story and they have like a raccoon as a pet. And I love raccoons. And the raccoon was the best part of the book. The rest of it was trash. Like, it was so bad. People say that it's cozy, it's like lighthearted for the most part, but I just got the ick from it so bad. And I don't know if we will force ourselves to do this for the show. I think we might have better things to do, but maybe eventually we'll read it. But there is a scene where she tells a room full of politically important people, because it's like between a half orc and a human, right? And the human, and they fall in love and they have sex, whatever, and she loves it. When he loves it, great, that's fine. But then she gets into a room full of important political people, and they're like, well, what are you, this orc's whore? And she's like, maybe I am. Maybe I beg for his big green cock every night. And I'm like, I couldn't fucking believe it. Like, I get wanting something like that, sure, but I would never get up in front of like my parents and my boss and I don't know, the mayor of the town that I live in, and be like, yeah, I love begging for big green dick.
Right,
no.
right. And I get this, I guess the shock factor in that,
Sure.
if she's making a political statement, but
Yeah.
if she's truly advocating for that,
It
in
was
herself,
so weird
that's
to me,
not.
man.
I do like some monster romance. Have you read C.M. Nacosta at all?
No.
Okay, so C.M. Nacosta knows what's up when it comes to monster romance. I read Morning Glory Milking Farm. This wasn't this year, but still worth a read. Mostly just because I saw it and I was like, what is this? What is this about? And it got me. Like, she's just
read it.
Such an amazing writer that, like, no matter, I mean, and it's crazy content. I think it's orcs. Or no, what are they called? Minotaurs. And it's a milking farm for their semen, and this human has a job essentially jerking minotaurs off, but there's a specific minotaur, and it's just so good. It's just so good. The writing is great, and it just takes you right there, and even though it's like the weirdest fucking scenario you could ever imagine, it just does it for me. Like, it just it's so good.
I want to read it so bad.
We should do a whole episode. I mean,
Definitely.
the whole writer. I've read a few of her books. I don't know that I finished any of them except that one, but so good. So good.
Yeah, so I think we definitely should put that one on the list for books we should do next year, because I think, isn't it fairly short too?
Oh, yeah. I think
Yeah.
I read it in a couple hours.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
It was like that. Wow.
I mean, this was a few years ago, so don't quote me.
Right. So then my other two books that I just really, and I read two of them because this is what happened is the plot was cool. It was like a monster and a monster hunter are put into an arranged marriage. And I was like, right? See, that idea is cool.
Absolutely.
But there's no, also this is the Shades of Sin series. So there's like no build up to it though. It's like, okay, she's forced into the marriage and then you immediately find out she never was a hunter because she is a monster. Like she wants to be a monster fucker. Like she got in trouble as a teenager for like drawing pictures of fucking a shade monster, which is what she is now married to. And there's this whole like misunderstanding over her scent, the way she smells, which also happens in Bride and actually also happens in Paladin's Grace. Like anything where it's like all the tension is based on one misunderstanding, I'm over it. I'm so over it. Like learn how to fucking communicate. Like that doesn't work for me as an adult on a level. Like I'm never going to be misunderstanding someone so hard that I spend like months freaking out about it. Like, no, we're not doing it. It's 2025. Learn how to communicate with your monsters. Like, I'm done with it. But yeah, the series was terrible. I read two of them because at the end of the first one, there's like a big plot twist. And then it ends. And I'm like, well, now I have to know how the plot twist goes. And it goes like this. It's a badly written sequel. It's terrible. And it was so bad. It's about her sister and her sister's escapade into reluctant monster fucking. And I read this on like a recommendation of somebody who was like, it's another like Notting style book. And there's like some other kind of kinky stuff. I was like, great, that sounds awesome. And it just was terrible. I know that it's fantasy, but everything was like so unbelievable. Like especially the sex aspects. It was like, have you ever had sex? Have you? I don't know. So that was just awful. Definitely don't recommend those to anybody. So those are my bad books of the year. There was one other that I think was called Tempt Me, and that was terrible. At least it was short. But it did give me the joy of seeing my partner's reaction when I told him that in this book, the male main character keeps calling the females, keeps calling her pussy, her pink hole. Over and over and over. And it was so weird. And I mean, that's a rabbit hole we can get down some other time, like euphemisms for vaginas. But that was fucking crazy. And I couldn't believe it. Did you have any bad naughty books you want to add to the list, or you think you're good?
No, because I'm not like you.
Right.
If I don't want to read it, I'm not gonna. So I think anything that I got that vibe from, I just put down. No Tomorrow by Carrie and Cole, though. I did like the book. I did finish it, but I did struggle a little bit with that one. The main male character is homeless for the first part of the book, and he's a musician, and then he becomes very famous, but he has a lot of mental health issues.
Typical
and
musician.
leaves her just kind of out in the woods, like metaphorically, of course. And I wasn't a fan of that, which gets back to, I guess, the devotion piece for me, which he was to the best of his abilities, but I don't know, there was something about it that I just wasn't all about.
Yeah. Sometimes with that whole like third act breakup kind of thing, or like betrayal, that doesn't really work for me. It kind of ruins it for me. Bride was like that too. I don't know if you remember, they like got down and nasty, and then he was like, I can't be with you, I have to leave. And yeah, I'm sick of that kind of thing. Like, I think we can find a way to write conflict in a more interesting way. But I don't know. That's just me. I've never written a successful book, so maybe someday I'll eat my words. All right, so let's get into a little bit of fun here.
Yes.
So what was your most unputdownable book of the year?
I'm sure you and all of our listeners will guess it was 100% hands down Manacled. Nothing else this year kept my attention that way. It was just a constant, when can I be done with whatever else I'm doing in my life so I can read this book? It didn't matter what it was. My family came to visit. I had one-on-one time with my partner. It was like one of the busiest times ever at work. Didn't care. I just wanted to read this book.
That was
Could not put
definitely
it down.
one of mine too. Man, I was like staying up late every night, reading it on my phone anywhere I was. Lots of nonsense like that. For me, it was definitely also Paladin's Grace. Like I said, I literally read it in a day, and it just was kind of the perfect opportunity for it. And then also Reign and Ruin, the second time around. I read it twice this year. And the first time was audiobook, which I liked. But then when I read it, actually the physical copy, I couldn't stop reading it. And then the sequel as well, Storm and Shield. I staying up late every night. Oh my God, I stayed up till like 1 a.m. 2 nights in a row during the work week, like just punishing myself, trying to get, I couldn't stop.
For our listeners who don't know, Caitlin does not like to stay up very late. So that means a lot.
I don't like to stay up late, and I like to make sure, you might not know this, but I try to get like 9 hours of sleep every night, if not more.
I believe it.
I normally need like 9 or 10 hours, so that doesn't work well with staying up late. What do you think the best plot twist of the year was?
Oh man, so I mean, it might just be that we already did an episode, so it's the freshest in my mind, but it was also Manacled. I did guess how they were going to turn it into a romance, right? But still, like, how do you turn that into a romance? And they did.
That one was really good. I'm trying to think of another book I read that had like a big twist. I mean, I did read Court of Thorn and Roses, the whole series this year. That has a couple huge plot twists in it, which I won't get into in case we do ever get to read that one for the show. That series as a whole is like not as amazing, I think, as it's built up to be, but what could be as amazing as it is built up to be when it's at that level. But the plot twist was really, really interesting. There's a couple of them that I think are really great in that series. So I would say, yeah, maybe Court of Thorn and Roses. So which book do you think had the most beautiful writing?
Definitely Where the Crawdads Sing.
Really?
And probably Peaches and Honey would be second. Yeah, it's just so well written, so beautifully written. The author was actually a wildlife biologist, and she and her partner lived in like the wilds of Africa totally by themselves with the animals for like 20 years. So, and you can tell she definitely drew upon that in her characterization of the swamp and the marshland. And it might also be at the time I was at camp where there is a marsh. And so I was just, and it was summer and beautiful, and that's where I was at in my life. But just beautiful, beautiful writing. That's
awesome. For me, I would say maybe Peaches and Honey, I think was super gorgeously written. Of course, I also read Outlander this year, which I think are really nicely written books as well. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but I drink that shit. I drink it all day, that tea. And I have for such a long series. At least for me, it keeps my interest going throughout, which is not an easy task with, I think there's like 10 books currently. What about the biggest letdown of the year?
All right. So we're going to talk more about Marina Kent. So her last book of the Renaverse was God of War, which, like we had mentioned, the Royal Elite, this Legacy of God series that God of War ends as the children of the characters in the Royal Elite series. So specifically, I mean, it was a good book. I liked it. I read the whole thing. Again, some of Rena Kent's writing, which might be why she's ending, another reason she's ending the Renaverse, is it does feel a little formulaic. You kind of know what to expect at this point. For me, though, these specific characters, this was, I think, the 6th book in that series, and in all 6 books, they were building up to this one. As they went through every other couple, this couple's mentioned, and it's just, I was so excited for it. And it was still good. It wasn't bad, but it was not she did too much build up, She got me too excited.
Oversold it. That's a bummer.
It was a bummer.
I remember you telling me that you were so excited.
I was excited.
Yeah.
I did a countdown for it and everything.
Oh, yep. Yeah, that's right. I'm trying to think. Biggest letdown for me. I mean, the Shades of Sin books and the Tempt Me book, which is part of a series about the Wolf Hotel. It's like a young woman and her boss, who's like a millionaire hotelier, however you say it, and their sexual relationship. Those both had really great reviews, and I thought they were not good. Oh, also I read this book, The Plated Prisoner, the book number 1 out of that series, which I think was not great, especially considering it starts with like an orgy. Like literally the first page is a woman who's witnessing an orgy. You think it would be interesting. It's not.
Oh.
I hear that the series gets better, and I would be interested to keep it going. For the most part, the books that I didn't like this year, because of the audiobook aspect, like I would try them again, like reading them for real, and then see how I really feel about it if I have the time to do that. Because Plated Prisoner, Villains and Virtues, The Bridge Kingdom, I read that one because it was free on Audible, and that was terrible. And then I see people in the community that are like, oh my God, I love this whole series. And people say that like book 1 and 2 are not as good as the rest of them because her writing just kind of matures and evolves as it's going. But like, my God, that was so I think overall 2024, I did have some real stinkers, and of a few of those, I think I wouldn't like them even on a second chance thing. But there are some of those, like the books I just mentioned, that I think I would try them again and see if I changed my mind, and I wouldn't be surprised if I did. All right, what about books that made you cry, Jess?
In order from what made me cry the least to what made me cry the most: Peaches and Honey, Manacled, and The Lovely Return by Carrie and Cole.
Really?
Truly. The Lovely Return. I mean, I cried so much during that book. So much. That's the weird age gap one. Is kind of problematic. I mean, it's not. She does it well, but it is still kind of problematic. That one it's just sad.
Yeah.
It turns out it has a happy ending, like they all do. But meanwhile, it's a long book and it's sad the whole time.
That's so funny. For me, I honestly don't cry with books that much. And well, it's again because I do the audiobooks. So if I'm reading a book, then I'm more emotionally connected to it, and then I might cry. In real life, I'm a big time crier. I'm like hardcore. But as far as reading, I'm not a big crier. But I did cry a little bit during Reign and Ruin, and Storm and Shield. Both of them made me cry. Storm and Shield maybe a little bit more than the other one, surprisingly, but they both did make me cry. I don't think Manacled made me cry at all, which is a little insane.
That is insane.
Peaches and Honey, I didn't fully let it go, but I was definitely choking up.
There was one specific part where I bawled like a baby,
Yep.
and Ben was playing video games with his friends, and they were all on the phone. And I was
God,
like, oh my
really?
God, he better not see me and say something so they all hear and ask me what's wrong, because
so
I'm not
funny.
going to be able to hold it together.
That's so funny.
But just one part, and it actually had nothing to do with the romance.
No, but it is so touching and sad and sweet. Are there any books that you DNF'd this year? Did not finish?
Yep. I don't remember them for the most part, but L. Kennedy and T.L. Swan, I just binged so many of their books back to back. Like, they were my top read authors. So I think by the time I got to the last ones I read that I didn't finish, I was just kind of burnt out and needed a genre switch or an author switch. I may very well go back and finish them.
Yeah.
Especially the one from L. Kennedy, the characters, I was actually really looking forward to their story. And it was also like it was when I went to Vegas that I started reading it on the plane, and then my whole trip happened, and I don't think I've really read anything since I got back.
Really?
So I may just go back to that and finish it, but I might also look for something different. Oh, well, I've read Peaches and Honey, actually.
Yep. Oh, that's true. Yep. For me, I think I DNF'd Villains and Virtues. And that might have been the only hard DNF for like a book that I was recommended and I was like, no. There are other books, like I just previously mentioned, my like letdown books that I definitely should have DNF'd them. But it was like, I have 2 hours of cleaning my house to do and I need something to listen to. So I kept listening to them. But those should have been DNFs and I didn't pay attention enough for me to like even really tell you that much of what happened. So essentially those were DNFs as well, because it was like, I'm listening but I'm not fucking home, you know what I mean? So were there any surprise trends, like books that surprised you this year?
Manacled.
Definitely.
When you originally told me about it, I was like, oh, how am I going to tell Caitlin I don't want to read this? And then I just opened it and was immediately sucked in. But otherwise, and in the Rena Kent one, I was expecting it to blow me away, especially with the knowing she had said this would be the last book in the Renaverse. I was like, oh, this is going to blow me away. And it was just kind of a letdown. What about you?
Definitely Manacled for me as well. I had read some reviews of the book and it sounded fun but crazy, and I just was like, fan fiction, I used to read it here and there, like one-shot fan fiction back in the Tumblr days of the early 2010s, but as far as like a really epic fan fiction, I've never read someone else's. So I wasn't expecting it to be as good as it was, but it definitely, like, it almost made my top books of the year. It was so good. Other than that, some of the books surprised me with like how much I didn't love them, but overall Manacled was the one that I really wasn't expecting. And I haven't read Draco Malfoy and the Mortifying Ordeal of Being in Love, but I really want to. It's definitely on my list of like
I will totally reread that if we want to do that one.
We definitely should, because it's getting a release next year too. So I'm hoping that will be a nice surprise hitter. Although now I'm kind of prepared, because it's like, wait, hold on, some of this Hermione fic is like the real deal. It's good stuff. So thank you, Manacled, for opening my eyes.
Well, and there just really is something about fan fiction that, like, if it's done right and done well, seeps into your bones, unlike other fiction. There's just something about it. We should look into Wattpad. I don't know how much experience you have with that.
A little bit.
But before I was all about Kindle, I was all about Wattpad.
Really?
There's some trash on there, but there's some gems.
I used to write fan fiction a long time ago, and I thought it was good. I thought it was interesting and emotional. So I should have been more open-minded, I guess. But so, are there any books in 2025 that you are looking forward to getting to read?
Well, Alchemized,
right,
when it comes out.
Yes.
From Manacled. And then Pits and Poison, which is the sequel to Peaches and Honey. Honestly, I've already started reading it though, and I think I'll probably end 2024 finishing that book.
Nice.
So, but other than that, I haven't thought too much about it, just because I've been so busy. And
for the most part, we just kind of let it flow.
Yeah.
But it'll be interesting to see how it goes this year with doing the podcast, But I'm also really excited for Alchemized. The next book in, is it like the Empyrean, the Fourth Wing series, which we need to talk about that, because I want to do a Fourth Wing episode. I might have CJ do it with me, because I don't think you would like Fourth Wing.
I take no offense.
I think you should give it a little peek and see what you think. Which I didn't super love it when I read it this year. But again, I'm all about second chances. So I want to give it another read and do it for the show, because the third book in the series comes out in January, and I think that'll be really interesting. But yeah, I'm looking forward to finishing the Mages of the Wheel series. Other than that, I can't think of any like big releases in 2025. Hopefully maybe Winds of Winter from Game of Thrones, the Song of Ice and Fire series will come out. I doubt it, but my God, that'd be amazing. So yeah, I don't know, we're just gonna keep going through the books we have picked out. And if you guys have any recommendations for the 2025 podcast books, feel free to let us know, because, you know, we're always looking for something new. So, yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Is there anything you wanted to go back over, or do you feel like that was a pretty good wrap up?
That was a pretty good wrap up.
All right, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening to 2024, A Year in Books from Babygirl Book Club. Feel free to put some of your favorites, your least favorites, your unexpected successes, or your unexpected failures in the comments, and let us know what you guys were reading this year. Thank you so much for listening.
That's a wrap.
Woohoo!
Woo!